Good afternoon. I've just lived just long enough to have to wear these now. Can't express my humble appreciation and gratitude enough for your being here and welcoming me back to this wonderful city. I arrived here 4 years ago, and literally as my truck was still full of furniture, I made my way down to North High School and got immediately involved in the community. I was welcomed with open arms. I was valued and appreciated for being me and having my own voice. You don't find that often in many cities. So thank you, Omar. I'd like to thank the conveners of this auspicious gathering of concerned citizens and clergy, businessmen and women, people of goodwill, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank and appreciate my family of NCAP, Eastern Nebraska Community Action Partnership. Thank you. I'm so glad to see you here today as well. My thoughts today are going to be framed around a scripture. Imagine that, a preacher going to use a scripture. And it's one that Dr. King used time and time again. I think if we're going to properly understand what courageous acts of nonviolence should foster, it's found in these few words out of the prophet Amos, 5th chapter, verse 24. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Dr. King would often give a story about a famous novelist that died. Among his papers was found a list of suggested story plots for future stories. The most prominent underscored among them was a plot of a widely separated family that inherits a house in which they have to find a way to live together. Now, the key to this plot is found in the requirement, and I dare say the necessity, to live in one house as one family. And they have to exercise the nonviolent direct action to become one, to live as one, because we only have one house. And I believe this is our great challenge today, to live as one, considering the other in the highest level of dignity and compassion. In a real sense, if I fail to consider you, I have essentially failed to consider myself. I'm deeply concerned about the state of our world house, as you are, our nation's house, our community's house. The house that should serve to nurture and develop the human personality is sadly becoming, for so many, a house of horrors. And because of our violent actions toward one another, we're fragmented, we're frustrated, and we're fractured in this house. And we must come to understand that the horrors are due to the level of injustice that Dr. King lived his life confronting through nonviolent, courageous acts of love and peace, because he understood that the termite effect of injustice destroys the foundation of any house. It corrodes the walls of protection for the most vulnerable in our communities, and it lowers the ceiling of opportunity for all. Our one house must not muffle or mute their voices. We must hear their stories, we must hear their truth. We must respond, for the quality of our life can be found in the mezzanine space between discovering injustice, then acting to eliminate it. For injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We must foster a life of service that blends the great boldness with great tact. We must merge a unique courage with an uncommon sternness. We can no longer stand by and watch the suffering of people and the constant stride of injustice across our house. We must become intentional interrupters of the status quo. We must hold systems that are gone awry accountable. Our one voice must break the cadence of the ironclad feet of oppression and disturb the pessimistic march of so many. There comes a time in our lives where we have to cry out for those that are suffering. Amos and Dr. King's legacy challenges us in this way. And so where do we start? We start with the understanding that nonviolence is an assertive, active response that confronts injustice. There's nothing passive about it. It is a courageous assault, I dare say, resistance against the very presence of evil. It allows us to courageously confront injustice, and the route of injustice will never change its course without righteous interruptions. And this was the case of the prophet Amos. Without question, his ministry was one of great boldness that he merged this kind of tact. But he was a person that had to confront the injustice of his day, just as Dr. King did in his time, so must we do in ours. Dr. King would say so often that the world is being destroyed, not so much by the vitriolic words of bad people, as much by the appalling silence of good people. We have too many people today being stored in the attic-like spaces of our house to keep them from the view of so-called special guests. They are the drug addicts. They are the homeless, the mentally ill. They are the drifters. The aging elders are seasoned elders in our community that live without resources. We store them in spaces and act as if they're not home. Rather than confronting the issue of human dignity and justice, we store them like we have the junk drawer in our house, or the room that's cluttered with all of the things we don't want to pay attention to. We close the door. Ralph Ellison said that I am an invisible man. I'm a man of substance and of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. So we must speak with this kind of courage today to tell those who are not seen that I see you. And this was the case of Dr. King. He simply woke us up. He woke America up from its drug-induced state of slumber. And oh, how we miss that dynamism, his vigor, his voice, his declarative acts of radical revolutionary tactics, full of righteous indignation and moral courage, yet yielding no weapon in rage, only blows of assurance, knowing that justice for all was more than just a simple quick quip or quote, but it was a principle worth suffering for, a principle worth living for, a principle worth dying for. We're missing this kind of driving force, this soul force that demands our action, the kind of anger at injustice. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote on the subject of anger, and I quote, "He that is angry without cause shall be in danger, but he that is angry with cause should not be in danger. For without anger, teaching will be useless, judgments unstable, crime unchecked." And he concludes by stating, "To be angry is not always an evil," end quote. Dr. West would say it this way, and I paraphrase, "Most present-day political leaders appear to be too hungry for status to be angry, too eager for acceptance to be bold, too self-invested in advancement to be defiant. And when they do drop their mask and try to get mad, their bold rhetoric is more performance than personal, more play acting than heartfelt. We need not rage, but righteous discontent that moves us to courageous acts. And what should we pay attention to in this time? What would Dr. King say to us? I submit at least we should consider mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex, the new Jim Crow. 30 years ago, only 300,000 people were incarcerated. Now we have 2 million people, approximately half of them being African American men. We didn't get here overnight, but this is sinister, and this is systematic. And there is a new Jim Crow of legalized discrimination, not based on color, but on conviction and classification as a felon. With that scarlet letter of felon, one is deprived of public housing, faces employment discrimination, denied voting rights. And it's a cruel thing to tell a man or woman getting out of prison, we expect for you to get a job, then pay taxes, and yet you cannot participate in the political democratic process that allows you to have representation. That is taxation without representation, and we poured tea out in Boston about that. But it's happening every day. Denied food stamps, public benefits, educational benefits, excluded from serving on a jury. Now, these are individuals that we refer to as returning citizens. Why returning citizens and not ex-cons or felons? Because we injure the human personality by assigning a title or description that does not allow us to give them full respect as citizens. Returning citizens because they are entitled rights. Returning citizens because a citizen has responsibility. It goes hand in hand, responsibility and rights. And so these individuals did not crawl through a sewer gate. They did not take their bed sheets and throw it over barbed wire and climb down the side of some brick wall. They did not ride out underneath in some grand attempt to escape underneath the laundry truck. They walked out through the front gate with a stamp, time served. And it's our responsibility now, as citizens of this world house, to consider how will we receive them back home. And so oftentimes they're going to confront all of the myths. Our society has been fed a constant diet of misinformation about crime and essentially people that have previously committed those crimes. The myths about who is prone to crime and violence breeds fear. And one thing's for sure, that whatever you and I fear, we will not seek to understand. And nonviolence seeks to win friendship and fosters understanding. Because what we do not understand, we will seek to control, we will seek to confine, because we fear it. And I think this quote that Frederick Douglass rendered in 1853 aptly describes this situation. A heavy and cruel hand has been laid upon us. As a people, we feel ourselves to be not only deeply injured, but grossly misunderstood. Our countrymen do not know us. They are strangers to our character, ignorant of our capacity, oblivious to our history and progress, and are misinformed as to the principles and ideas that control and guide us as a people. The great mass of American citizens estimate us as being characterless and purposeless people, and hence we hold up our heads, if at all, against the withering influence of a nation's scorn and contempt. We must understand that men and women coming out of prison, they're going to return. To the tune of over 650,000 a year, they're coming back. And the great question is whether we will see them as social junk, societal scrap, or a person of value and human personality and potential for greatness. Waldo Rolf Emerson said it this way: people see what they are prepared to see. In other words, people don't see what they want to see, people see what they are prepared to see. And our great responsibility is to prepare everyday people to see each other as God sees us, with all the worth and value that is due to them as a human being. What we are essentially having now is perpetual sentencing, where one has not only endured lockup, but now they must suffer the indignity of being locked out. And nonviolent, courageous acts must confront this. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of the profits being made off of the pain of incarcerated people. Tired. Corrections Corporation of America, privatizing prisons, contacted 48 states and essentially soliciting them to run state prisons for 20 years. Sounds like a good idea. They said they can run them more efficiently. They said they can run them more effectively. But they only had one caveat, that if they took over for 20 years, the state had to guarantee them 90% occupancy. How can you guarantee 90% occupancy? And this is an injustice, and we must speak up about it. I long for the day when we take the profit out of prisons. I have yet to see a prison closed in my lifetime due to a lack of occupancy. I have yet to see a prison wing closed and remodeled for education or infusion of a library or training institution because of a lack of occupancy. Sadly, before they finish putting the paint on the last wall, that new wing is already filled. We got to speak out about this. The next thing that I believe Dr. King would say to us is that we have to speak out about poverty and opportunity. Let us never forget that Dr. King risked his life and limb marching and fighting, pushing back against segregation, fought to rid our country of the discrimination that kept people from public accommodations. But let us never forget that he gave his life on that Memphis balcony of the Lorraine Motel between room 305 and 306, essentially standing with the working poor. It's a sad commentary today that we can even mention the words working and poor in the same sentence. It's oxymoronic. People working 40, 50, 60 hours a week and still can't make enough to feed their children. Trying to get things together and trying to come home from one part-time job to go to another part-time job. Working in between the time, working overtime, besides the time, and trying to find just a little time. Keep their sanity. Poverty level in America is almost 50 million people living below the federal poverty level. You know what that is? That's $23,050 for a family of 4. These are people that are working and can't make enough. 16 million children in poverty in what still remains the richest nation in the world. 9 million of those children in extreme poverty. Oh, we have work to do. Half of America living at 200% of the federal poverty level. Half of America making $45,000 for a household of 4. We have to ensure that work pays. We got to do something about this, lest it rest upon our conscience. Then finally, I believe we have to make sure that our voice is heard as we participate in the political process. Justice Marshall said years ago, history teaches us the great threats to liberty often comes in times of urgency, when constitutional rights seem to be extravagant to endure. We must exercise our power in politics, for politics is the process in which we as people live in a democracy, translate what we believe into public policy and practice. It is the process that determines who gets how much, when, and where of income, of education, of health care, of housing, and yes, of justice. Because now we must understand that we must decide of what kind of people we will become. Will we settle for less? What will be our legacy? Now, as the clock of destiny ticks and our hourglass of opportunity continues to drain, we have to have the courage to say that we are not the property of any political party. For no political party in and of itself is a paragon of political virtue or a juggernaut of social justice. Justice does not stampede in on the backs of elephants nor stroll in on the backs of donkeys. It is not robed in red and it is not baptized in blue. Justice is the result of men and women who have a God conscience enter into voting booths, city hall, council chambers, governor's seats, state legislatures, the Congress, the House, the Senate, to remember to love mercy, to do justice, and walk humbly with our God. That's how justice becomes a reality. In the days ahead, we must not cower and consider it to be unpatriotic to raise questions about our national character, even our local politicians. We can't figure out how to get things done without voices saying that we need to fix this. Because nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. For the scriptures have reminded us, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So in the days ahead, we must not cower and consider it unpatriotic to raise those serious questions. And we are called to a high level of conscience as well as our courage. As we consider the things that we must confront, we must stand not only for our interests, but also for our principles, because our principles declare that we must stand for justice for others. Therefore, we're never wrong to question why some rooms in our community's house are littered with check cashing, payday loan centers, rent-to-own centers, liquor stores, and we can barely find a dry cleaner, a coffee shop, a major chain grocery store, a major employer that's not a nonprofit. We have to ask these questions. We're not wrong to raise these questions. So what can we do? Everyone must find their place and post for the cause of justice. As the prophet Amos says, I was no prophet, neither was I a prophet's son, but I was a herdsman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. And the Lord took me as I followed the flock. And the Lord said unto me, go prophesy to my people Israel. We have to now bear the burden of bringing righteousness to a nation. And that's how Dr. King lived. He lived that mystical quality of nonviolence, that voluntary suffering can not only educate, but it can transform the world. He taught us that unearned suffering is redemptive. He gave his life as a gift. Now we are challenged today to give of ourselves. And we must continue to pass on to another generation the heirloom of responsibility. That service is the rent we pay for living on this earth. We must help this generation to find their place and their post and not make this generation feel as if they have missed their time to do something important or make an impact. We must not only speak about the great days of yesterday and tell our stories about how we marched with Dr. King, how we stood post for Malcolm X, how we fought for the release of Nelson Mandela, how we worked to end apartheid, how we organized with Fannie Lou Hamer, how we spoke truth to power with Ida B. Wells. We must also let them know that those stories are important, but those stories are still being written. Curtains are not closed. The saga continues. We must write new chapters with the power of daily actions of righteousness and justice. What can we do? As we reflect upon the calling of the prophet Amos, and as we celebrate the legacy of Dr. King, because they both possess the courage to be, the courage to act in love, the courage to stand for justice. Now the question for us is, now what will we do? Not just what they did, but what will we do? There's this wonderful line in Shakespeare's Othello by Iago: who steals my purse steals trash, 'tis something nothing, 'twas mine, 'tis his, and has been the slave to thousands. But he that fleishes from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him and makes me poor indeed. We are under threat of being robbed, not by someone wielding a pistol, but because of our indifference, by our complacency, by our unwillingness at times to get involved in that which will make us rich indeed, make us rich in love, make us rich in peace, make us rich in harmony and justice, because justice is love realized, and it redeems the souls of men and women. What can we do? We must love because love restores community. What can we do? We must act afresh and anew because the universe is definitely on our side. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown stands God in the shadows, keeping watch above his own. But we have not only a God that stands above, we have a God that steps into the affairs of men and women. And so often that he steps into those affairs by utilizing the gift that's within you and me. He steps into the suffering of people by sending us. As I read in Exodus, I have heard the suffering of my people. I've seen their misery, and now I'm come down to Egypt to take them out of that land and give them a promised land. So let us leave today determined to act. We must act now, for now is the accepted time, not tomorrow, not some more convenient season. It is today that our best work can be done, and not some future day or future year. We must act now. We must work while it is day, for night comes and no man can work. We must work until the low are lifted, until the outcasts are welcomed, until the lonely are comforted and dreams are no longer deferred. We must work until every child born in the socioeconomic basement today can reside on the balcony of tomorrow's opportunity. We must work until voting rights are no longer threatened, until politicians realize that budgets are more than forecasts, they're more than facts, they're more than figures, but they are moral documents, and that all life is to be considered valuable and worthy of investment. We must work until the day when he shall judge among the nations and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, until nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither will we study war no more, for war is still a poor chisel to carve out peace. We must work until justice roll down like waters, so let justice roll, until men and women returning from prison are no longer seen as social trash, but human treasures. Let justice roll. Let it roll until graduation rates of poor kids and black children and brown children exceed the average. Let justice roll. Let it roll until we get politicians who no longer make mockery of the obligation to serve all people and all neighborhoods. Let justice roll until health care really becomes no longer a privilege for the few, but a right for all. Let justice roll until the legacy of all that hatred in the past is washed away in the affirmative acts of redress and policies of remedy. Let justice roll until the last does become first, until decaying communities become havens of hope, until we organize our efforts, mobilize people, exercise our power, until love becomes common and peace prevails, until all life is valued, until the day that we make of this old world something new. Let justice roll until we realize that you and I can make a difference. If you never write a best-selling book, you still can make a difference. If you never travel the 7 seas, you still can make a difference. If you never get the home on the hill with the gated fence, you still can make a difference. So let justice roll, and if it has to take us crying together, serving together, laboring together, praying together, standing with one another, until this fragmented community becomes one house. God bless you today.